I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Tuesday. We have survived Memorial Day weekend, which means we are getting ever closer to training camps, which fire up in about 7 weeks or so, end of July. Pretty excited to be here in the midst of summer. We are getting some OTAs, which Dennis means we're getting some news. The Steelers were in camp today. A lot of interviews with Mason Rudolph, who said he's just happy to be somewhere where he's wanted, seemed pretty jovial. A lot of talk over the weekend from Aaron Rodgers, who was interviewed in panels, who seemed to give some more winks and nods to the fact that he was still considering playing for the Steelers. And then reports breaking this week that the Steelers are also continuing to look into the possibility of a trade for Kirk Cousins. So we have three kind of players on the stage for starting quarterback week one for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it is May 27th, and knowing that any answer you give today, we're going to set in stone and is the only final answer each of us can give. Who is the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers on week one of the NFL season?
Kirk Cousins.
I'm going with Mason Rudolph. Neither of us apparently think Aaron Rodgers, who, he made some football comments. He also made some strange political and life comments. That
no way. Aaron Rodgers?
Not doing himself any favors out there.
No, I think if I'm looking at who's on the team and who's projected to be on the team, it's obviously Aaron Rodgers. But Rodgers is such a wild card at this point that he could just walk away and leave them hanging. He doesn't have any allegiance to the Steelers
or to anything really.
Really. So if I'm looking at their current quarterback room, Mason Rudolph is going to start over Will Howard and Skylar Thompson. Could they go into the season with a, low energies, low watt that would be a low watt offense. But you got DK Metcalf. Roman Wilson is getting a lot of talk up. He's, growing by leaps and bounds since last year. He's healthy. Calvin Austin looked good. He flashed. You got Steady Eddie Van Jefferson there. No, Steady Eddie Robert Woods there. I saw Luke Sawhook post on Twitter. He said, my life is screwed. We're posting Robert Woods, reps from practice. But, Woods is steady. He's not a game breaker, but he's theoretically going to be in the right place, doing the right thing.
The real wild card is Roman Wilson because he basically redshirted as a rookie. But it was an interesting pick last year when they had no depth, and newsflash, they still have no depth.
You have DK Metcalf, who's a downfield threat a la George Pickens, but not near as big a headache. I think you can count on Metcalf to give you 100% every rep. There's never been any real talk about him taking plays off or doing, he isn't the distraction George Pickens was.
I see a lot of 20 to 17 games in Pittsburgh's future, or maybe 17 to 10 games in Pittsburgh's future, because
it certainly looks that way. I would Yeah, a lot of 17-10 games where 7 of those 17 points have been scored by the defense.
Yeah, same as it ever was. The other piece of OTA news today, James Cook has been sort of at odds with the Bills kind of all off season, has very lofty aspirations for his contract that the Bills have yet to meet. Did not show up for OTAs. Obviously, this is the early portion. I believe this is still the voluntary portion. Any concern for you about this situation as we approach training camp?
Yeah, I mean, so yes and no. No, because he knows the offense. That it's not like he needs to go through an install with a new OC or anything like that. But yes, he's not there, and he's their best back. Now, I get it. They may not want to pay him what he wants, or they may not want to pay it right now. I like Ray Davis, friend of the show, for what he brings to the table, but I don't know that he's a workhorse by any stretch of the imagination. He was a 4th-round pick in 24. Ty Johnson has flashed, but I don't know that I'm psyched about the prospect of my backfield being led by Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. That being said, Josh Allen is the goal line back. They did sign Josh Palmer to pair with Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman. They're looking for a breakout from Coleman after a fairly disappointing rookie season, but they did sign Elijah Moore, and Curtis Samuel is back. So they do have, they've got this whole host of very similar receivers: KJ Hamler, Curtis Samuel, Elijah Moore, Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakir. They don't have an alpha. Is Dalton Kincaid gonna be that big receiver they need? I don't know. Keon Coleman, he's got good size, but he physically profiles as an alpha. But there's just a lot of questions. If I'm a Buffalo fan, and I would certainly feel a lot better about James Cook being there. But who knows? The free agent pickings are getting fairly slim, so
Yeah.
they work it out.
Well, that's a good.
In a job.
It's a good segue to today. We are continuing our NFL unit grades, moving over to AFC running backs. We're going to be looking at the first 8 backfields in the AFC. I would say in general, I thought the AFC backfields were a little less auspicious than the NFC backfields, even a lot of the ones that we'll have on day 2 in the top. But, some of these bottom backfields, there is maybe some potential, but a lot of muddled situations, some underperformers, and just a lot of guys going on. We have the same number 16, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs, reigning AFC champions. On their roster, they have Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, who they signed back. They brought in Elijah Mitchell from the 49ers. They drafted Rashard Smith in the 7th round, and they added college free agent Elijah Young. We've seen Pacheco have some good seasons. Last year was not one of them. He finished with only 310 yards rushing, only 3 more yards and 1 fewer touchdown than Patrick Mahomes, who plays quarterback and had 25 fewer carries. Their best running back last year was actually Kareem Hunt, 728 yards, 7 touchdowns on 200 carries. He's getting a little long in the tooth, not incredibly explosive. Pacheco, a 7th-round pick going into a contract year, coming off really a lost season. He did not look good when he came back from that broken leg either. Really poor down the stretch. They obviously didn't trust him in the playoffs. He was a distant second. Elijah Mitchell has had some good seasons, but he's not played much the last few years, including last year when he was on IR the whole season. So for me, this backfield is more questions than answers, which is why I have them at 16.
Yeah. Isaiah Pacheco is a great story. 7th round draft pick, fought his way to the top of the depth chart. Has good straight line speed, but he's a battering ram of a back in a satellite back body. He's not, he's what, 205. He's not overly big. I like the style of his game. I like it a lot better when Derrick Henry does it. Kareem Hunt looked pretty washed last year. I'd put him in the same boat as Austin Eckler. He's got good. The mental part is still there for Kareem Hunt. He was never a speed merchant. He was never a shake and bake wiggle guy. He was always a guy that was going to fight hard, get the tough yards, had a nose for the end zone, great vision, but he's clearly lost a step or two. Mitchell, I dare say he's probably had more great games than a great season when he got the opportunity in the vaunted San Francisco offense. They thought enough of him to let him walk. He's, one of these 200-pound backs again, not a big dude. A lot of the dynasty folks are on Brashard Smith, the 7th round back they drafted as, a receiving back. And there's a lot of hope for him to move up and kind of take that role. But I think we're going to see, they've got Travis Kelce, Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, and Xavier Worthy. I think we're going to see the pendulum swing back to that Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball all over the yard approach and, using the pass to open up the run. But there's just not a lot of pizzazz there. I don't think Brashard Smith is the second coming of Jamal Charles, who was a 200-pound back, but I just don't think Brashard Smith is that dude. I don't think Eli Mitchell is that dude. So it'll be a year of piecing the backfield touches together. I don't, right. If I had to roster one right now, it's probably still Pacheco. If he's healthy, he may, take that kind of end zone roll back away from Kareem Hunt. So, there's not a lot of pizzazz at all.
I think at their price points, I kind of like Elijah Mitchell because he's practically free. And if he bounces back to something close to what we saw in San Francisco, that could be pretty interesting. I was never as high on Pacheco as some other people, and I didn't think he looked very good last year. And he's going into a contract year. I think this is, they're ready to move on. I'm surprised they didn't take a back in the draft, but we shall see. You and I have the same next two teams, but in a different order. At 15, you have the Denver Broncos on their roster. R.J. Harvey, Audric Estime, who was a 5th-round pick in 24, Jaleel McLaughlin, a college free agent from 23, Tyler Beatty, and a college free agent from last year, Blake Watson.
So I spent a lot of time looking at these teams and kind of trying to justify, like, what am I evaluating here? Because the team I have ahead of them is the Browns, whom you have at 15. And ultimately, I looked at it and I said, well, there's Quinshon Judkins and R.J. Harvey at the top of the pecking order for each team. Judkins has the better draft capital by a good half a round. Judkins feels a little more like a bell cow back, though the Browns had Nick Chubb and didn't use him as a clear bell cow back. We've seen Jerome Ford, he was RB16 2 years ago, and last year missed some time, was RB31 or 33. I know that Jaleel McLaughlin has flashed a little bit. There's high hopes for Audric Estime. He did get a little more playing time at the end of last season. He's a big battering ram back. I think he ran a 4.7 40 at the combine or his pro day, but he's a 230 pounder. And if Sean Payton does the receiving, the satellite receiving change of pace back paired with the bruiser, that looks like it's going to be Harvey and Estime. McLaughlin, he's a guy that had a lot of touches in college. There's something to be said for getting a lot of reps. I know I talk about that a lot when it comes to quarterbacks, but at running back, there's also something to be said for, getting too many reps and taking too much tread off the tires. And I look at Cleveland, and they spent second round pick on Judkins, fourth round pick on Sampson. They have Jerome Ford still slotted in as their RB2. Pierre Strong is their RB4. He's a mostly a special teams guy. And ultimately, I just felt like Denver isn't quite as strong at running back, with running back potential, as Cleveland is. It's basically Estime and Judkins. Who do you want? Well, I want Judkins. It's Harvey and Ford. Who do you want? Well, I want Harvey. But I think the gap between Judkins and Estime is substantially bigger than the gap between Harvey and Ford. And, Judkins just tips the scale a little more because of the better draft capital.
I don't really think he does have better draft capital. I think you're just talking about where teams – the Browns sucked more than Denver did last year. Both of them took the running back with the second-round pick that they had. I think Denver even moved up a couple of picks to be able to make their selection in the second round to get Harvey. So I don't really think draft capital difference to me would be differences in rounds, or if a team had to trade back in to get one, just where they fall in the pecking order is, I think a little bit off. You mentioned I have Cleveland. Cleveland's depth chart is Quinshon Judkins, Jerome Ford, Dylan Sampson, the two rookies, Pierre Strong, and then they have Amani Marshall, who was a college free agent. Judkins had a strong college career. He had some decent years at Ole Miss in 22 and 23. Then he came to Ohio State last year, splitting with Travion Henderson, still went for 1,000 yards. I think he's pretty good. Jerome Ford kind of is what he is. He had a decent year last year, appeared in 14 games, had 565 yards, was their leading rusher, 3 touchdowns. Dylan Sampson is an interesting pick too. They got a couple of bites at the apple, but I liked RJ Harvey's college production. He had more than 3,000 yards rushing and almost 40 touchdowns the last 2 years at UCF. And you would say, well, UCF may be a smaller school, but with college realignment, they're in the Big 12, so they're playing a decent schedule in there. Last year, you talk about Audric Estime. He was okay. He only got 76 carries as a rookie, 10 touchdowns, finished with more than a 4 yards per carry average, which was better than Javonte Williams. But Jaleel McLaughlin, I think, is the underrated one. I have questions about whether he can improve as a pass blocker, but he was definitely the most explosive of the runners that they had. He had 496 yards and a touchdown, only 113 carries last year. I think that gives them some options. I don't think either of these teams is incredible. I think both of these teams have upside, and it's probably just going to be a matter of which rookie hits in the offense. And considering the all-around dumpster fire that Cleveland is, I have more confidence that Harvey, especially listening to how Sean Payton has talked about him in the press conferences he's done this week for OTAs, fits in the offense behind the offensive line in Denver. So
I know we keep seeing pictures of RJ Harvey hanging out with Sean Payton's daughter. He might end up in the doghouse there.
I mean, Shedeur Sanders keeps talking about what a great mentor and role model Deshaun Watson has been. So I don't know what the hell's going on in Cleveland. I don't.
Well, he's also the fourth string quarterback. So
For now, we shall see. Both of us have the same team at 13. It's that aforementioned Pittsburgh Steelers. On their roster, they went and drafted Caleb Johnson. They brought back Jalen Warren, who was their number 2 back last year. And they added a trio of free agent kind of depth players in Kenneth Gainwell from the Eagles. They got Trey Sermon from the Colts. They brought in Evan Hull, who I think previously was with the Colts. They still have Cordero Patterson. They apparently still have Jonathan Ward, and they signed Max Hurlman. That's too many people. Maybe 4 or 5 of these guys make the roster, but this is really probably about Caleb Johnson and Warren. Warren did not, to me, have a great first year in that Arthur Smith offense last year. Najee Harris was still pretty much their primary back, but Caleb Johnson, an interesting pickup at Iowa last year, 240 carries, 1,537 yards, 21 touchdowns. I think he fits kind of that Steelers mentality and what the Steelers want to do on offense. I think that gives them a little bit of upside. Jalen Warren probably also the safest bet of any of the running backs in the AFC list so far, which really isn't saying much, but he had 511 yards on only 120 carries last year, did have 38 reception, is a good pass catcher. But what do you like about the Steelers backfield?
So with Arthur Smith, we just expect there's going to be a run heavy offense. And if Mason Rudolph is the quarterback, it most certainly is going to be run heavy. Now, that could go completely out the window if Aaron Rodgers does sign there and basically checks out of every run play into a pass, which, Aaron Rodgers is wont to do. But I think Caleb Johnson fits that mold of what Arthur Smith wants to do. He's a more explosive Najee Harris. And, I think Harris had an okay season last year. I think that Johnson will get the opportunity to carry the ball 250 times this year, honestly. And I think he can have a good year. They like what Jalen Warren can do. I think they like him as a change of pace back. As far as the depth, I think Kenneth Gainwell might be as much about trying to bring some more winning culture to the team than anything else. I don't see him taking the place I don't see him surpassing Jalen Warren as the number 2 back. But I see him as a reliable veteran. Trey Sermon, God bless him, former Buckeye, but what are we really doing here with that?
I forgot Trey Sermon moved. Trey Sermon and Evan Hull were like depth on the Colts. Apparently, both shifted to depth on the Steelers. An interesting situation.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like Cordero Patterson makes the team because he's a kick returner, and they can stick him in at running back, and he can eat up some plays as long as he's running straight ahead and not having to shift side to side. Jonathan Ward is, he's the jaggiest of jags, and I don't even know who the Hurlum guy is or whatever his full name
I think
is.
it's really about Johnson, Warren, and then seeing which of those 2 other backs maybe makes the roster. I don't see the Steelers keeping 5, probably only 4. So if Patterson ends up making it for special teams, it's probably Gainwell.
Yeah, I would expect, because Gainwell can play the run and the pass, and so he's going to be a reliable veteran back there.
Yeah.
Sermon, I think Sermon is a quote unquote professional running back. I just don't think he's really that talented. I would have loved for him to be as a Buckeye, but he had a great meme when he was at Ohio State, that looking up at the camera. That was fantastic. That sly, wry smile he had, but he just could never. He went to San Francisco and was entitled, and he never was able to shake that. And for I guess good reason. He just didn't have the talent. If you're a running back and you go to San Francisco and can't be productive, that's on you.
Yeah. Well, at 12 and 11, you and I have the same two teams, but in a slightly different order. So I'm going to give the teams and their depth chart. One is the Jacksonville Jaguars. They have Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby on the roster. They drafted Byshul Tootin. They also have Keelan Robinson. They drafted LaQuint Allen, and they signed Jaquidin Jackson. And then the Tennessee Titans have veteran Tony Pollard, who came as a free agent last year, Tyjae Spears, who they took in the 23 draft, Julius Chestnut was a college free agent in 22. They drafted Kyle Mullings in the 6th round, and they picked up Micah Bernard as a college free agent. You have the Jaguars at 12 and the Titans at 11, and I have the inverse, Titans at 12, Jaguars 11. What separates them for you?
Not a hell of a lot.
It's the same.
I mean, honestly, I just feel like Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, I just think are slightly enough better than Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. Etienne, a couple years ago, he had a good season, but for whatever reason, he fell off. He fell off hard. Bigsby, we've talked ad nauseum about the horror of his rookie season. He had some really nice games last year. I just don't know if he's got what it takes to establish himself as that banger back in Jacksonville. Byshul Tootin, he opened up camp by putting his first carry on the ground. LaQuint Allen, good pass receiver. So it feels like Allen and Tootin are kind of guys that may push Etienne more so than Bigsby. I wanted Bigsby to be better, to be more. I have several shares of him across my dynasty teams. But I can't say as I'm necessarily a believer at this point. And it feels like with Liam Cohen coming in, there's going to be renewed emphasis on the passing game, especially with Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. Thomas was a stud last year, and Hunter, we're still waiting to see how it shakes out. How much offense is he going to play? What's he really going to bring to the table? Are they just giving him lip service on defense to keep him happy through camp? And then when the season starts, they're going to be like, hey, man, catch, just keep throwing him the ball. But overall, I like Pollard and Spears better than the top of the Jacksonville depth chart. I probably like Tootin and Allen better than Chestnut and Khalil Mullings. Mullings, he was a linebacker till, a season ago. And then he went in and took the running back spot at Michigan away from Donovan Edwards. He's Hassan Haskins. He's Jordan Howard, but not quite as good. It's just, he's a big dude that's going to run into the line, whatever hole you tell him to run to, he's going to run to it, and he's going to run into it, whether it's open or not.
Yeah, and for me, I think it was the depth and upside of Jacksonville that had me give them the edge. I also am not as high on Spears as you are. He, to me, is a player that a lot of people have talked about the potential, but he's kind of like all hat and no cattle. He was injured a lot last year, only 312 yards, only had a little over 400 yards his first season. He only has a little over 700 yards in his entire NFL career, just 1 yard less than what Tank Bigsby recorded last year alone. Pollard's been fairly consistent, 1,000 yards in each of the last 3 seasons, the previous 2 with Dallas, last year with Tennessee. I think he's a solid back, but I think we've seen over his career, he's not a dynamic number one. He works better as part of a tag team, and I don't even know if they really have that tag team for him in Tennessee. Jacksonville, meanwhile, you're right that ATN didn't have a great year last year. He struggled with injuries that caused him to miss a couple of games and caused him to be limited and knocked out of several others. He had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons before last year. Had about 150, had about 100 fewer carries last year, which I think is one of the reasons his yardage fell off. Wasn't quite as efficient, but that Jacksonville offense was a struggle in general. I thought Bigsby really bounced back and looked pretty good last year, really picking up his game at times. And I liked both Tootin and Allen. LaQuint Allen had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons for Syracuse, and you're right, it was a great pass catcher, not just for college, but in general. 38 receptions in 23. He had 64 receptions out of the backfield last year, which is a ton for any back, but especially in a college system. Bishal Tootin had a little over 2,000 yards and 25 touchdowns in the last 2 years in Virginia Tech. I like the dynamic nature. I think Jacksonville could be a backfield in flux, but we saw Liam Cohen make a lot out of some young and talented backs with upside in Tampa Bay last year, and that could be a real asset. So I just gave them a little edge. I don't think there's a ton that separates these teams from me, really, either.
Yeah, we're not going out in the alley and fighting this one out.
No, and if you were more in on one than the other, I would get it. I don't, I didn't think either of them was incredible. They're, upper half of the bottom half of the AFC running back room draw, which a lot of AFC South teams in this grouping, including the same team we have at 10, the Houston Texans. They are led by Joe Mixon. They picked up Woody Marks in the 4th round as a rookie. They have Dario Gunbowale, Damian Pierce, who was a 4th rounder in 22. They have J.J. Taylor, kind of a depth guy, and Jawar Jordan, who was a 6th rounder last year. This is really, for me, about Joe Mixon. I think he is a consummate pro, fits this offense well. Limited to 14 games with injury last year, but ran for 1,000 yards, had 11 touchdowns, caught 36 passes. I'm interested in Woody Marks. I thought Damian Pierce looked better last year in his 2nd year in the system. Dario Gunbowale is a decent role player. I mean, they have some decent depth. If something happens to Mixon, this backfield probably takes a pretty big dive. But Mixon, I would say for me, is the best probably individual back of any of the teams we've covered so far.
I would agree. My biggest concern with Mixon is just how old he is. He's in his 8th year now, maybe going into his 9th year. He's had a lot of touches. I agree.
He's going into his 9th year.
He fits the offense to a T, running that zone blocking scheme. But is he going to be able to hold up as he's getting older? He's a big back. He was a 230-pounder coming in, I think 6 foot, 6'1", 230. And great pass receiver, good blocker. He's a 3-down back. Now, they did supplement him with Gumbawale in the passing game at times. I think Woody Marks has shown to be an exceptional pass receiver in college, but mediocre at best runner. Will Damian Pierce continue to improve in the zone blocking scheme? I think Pierce has a ton more explosiveness than Joe Mixon. I don't see him overtaking Mixon by any stretch. My question is, if Mixon blows out his knee in game 1, are they going to Pierce? Right now they list Pierce as the 4th running back on the depth chart on our lads. I certainly think he would leap over Woody Marks, and I dare say he would probably surpass Dario Gumbawale.
Yeah.
So, now we got Damian Pierce, and what are we going to get out of that?
I think we have to see how Marks does in the preseason. I would think it would be Marks and Pierce kind of splitting back there. Ogunbowale feels like a guy that's listed 3rd right now because he's kind of a special team or jack of all trades. And if Joe Mixon's healthy, Mixon's taken 90% of the carries, and you mix in a couple of carries from Marks and then a Gunbowale plays some weird plays.
Well, they use a Gumbawale in the 4-minute drill last year on several occasions. So when they knew they were going to be passing, but yeah, this group is pretty much carried by Joe Mixon until we see more from Pierce or Marks.
Now we reached number 9, and this is our last one for this half. You and I each have a very different team. You went with the Cincinnati Bengals. Their roster, Chase Brown, who was a 5th-round pick in 23, led the backfield last year. Zach Moss, who came over as a free agent from Indianapolis last year. They brought back Samaje Perine, who played for the Broncos and the Chiefs the last couple of years. They drafted Taj Brooks in the 6th round. They brought in Gary Brightwell, formerly, I believe, of the Giants. They have Kendall Milton, and they brought in Quali Connolly, a college free agent. So what stands out to you about the Bengals?
Nothing. I like what Chase Brown did. I have questions about how much workload he can really handle. He's a sturdy guy. He's at 5'9", 209. So he's got, he's in that DeAndre Swift, that sort of stocky, fast. He's got potential to be the guy. I don't know if Cincinnati's willing to give him all of that. Zach Moss is going to be healthy, and they had no qualms about starting Zach Moss over Chase Brown when most of us felt Chase Brown was the better guy. I don't think that happens this year. I think Perine, he's probably going to end up he's a guy that's going to get in there because they trust he's going to block the right guy in the passing game, which is going to hamper Moss and Brown. And Taj Brooks is the other guy. I like Brooks's potential. He rushed for I want to say close to 2,500 yards over the last 2 seasons. He's a good pass catcher. But he's kind of built the same way that Chase Brown is. He's not a super tall guy, but he's got some heft to him, some density. I like the potential there. I like that we've seen Brown be very productive. What was he? He was a solid, a high-end RB2 last year, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
And so where did he have? He was RB10. So he was, he put up some good numbers, and that was, not really getting the full workload till week 4 when Moss got injured. So for me, that really pushed the Bengals above most of the other teams. I'm not thrilled with their depth. Zach Moss, he was nothing for 4 years in Buffalo. And then he went to Indianapolis, and Jonathan Taylor got hurt, and he just seemed to fit that scheme a lot better. And then they brought him to Cincy to be, the guy because they let Mixon walk. And really, I think the guy in Cincy in the backfield is just somebody to keep the defenses honest because Joe Burrow is going to throw the ball 70% of the time. But then Brown popped off and he looked really good. I don't know. It's a lot of this, I put them up at 9 because I just felt like, if I'm looking at Brown and Mixon, I probably want Brown. Behind both of them, it's really, not very enticing. I want Brown over Pollard. I want Brown over Spears. And so really it was, unless I'm dipping into the rookies, I want Brown over pretty much all of the backs behind him. But, I like the backs ahead of him better at the top of the order or at the top of the depth chart on those teams. So why do you have New England 9?
Yeah, and at my 9, I went with the New England Patriots on their depth chart. They have Ramondre Stevenson, They took Travion Henderson in the second round, as Dennis would say, greater draft capital than Quinshon Judkins or R.J. Harvey because he went a couple picks before. Then Antonio Gibson, who came over as a free agent last year. Lan Larson, college free agent, who our lads has listed over Travion Williams, who came over as a free agent from Cincinnati, and then Terrell Jennings. It's really about Ramondre, Travion, and Antonio Gibson. And
to be fair, Henderson didn't have better draft capital than Quinshon Judkins.
He didn't go out.
I thought Judkins went 2 picks ahead of him.
Oh, I thought the Patriots had the pick before. It's hard to keep track of where the low. I knew those guys were at the top of the second round. So, and weren't there only? There was only.
I think there's only 3 drafted in the second.
3 in the second because Caleb Johnson went in the third round. So
yeah,
yep, 2 in the first, 3 in the second. So, Ramondre Stevenson has been a solid back. He had a fine but maybe not spectacular season last year. 800 yards on the ground, caught 33 passes. He's actually a couple of years removed from his 1,000-yard season, which was in 2022. He's missed time with injury in 3 of the 4 professional seasons he's had, which gives me a little bit of a pause. He's solid when he's out there. Antonio Gibson, I think, had a solid first year. He feels like the kind of guy that's going to slide into more of a role player kind of role. I think Travion Henderson is the future here. I like him in Dynasty more than either of the other 2. I like him a little bit more than Judkins or Harvey too in Dynasty. But I wouldn't be surprised if in 2025 he and Ramondre have more of a split, and Ramondre even finishes as maybe the higher rusher. I think there's going to be something of a transition. I'm also curious to see how backs are deployed. Josh McDaniels comes back to run the offense there, and he hasn't always been it's an interesting combination of him and Mike Vrabel, because during Vrabel's tenure with Tennessee, they very much like to lock into a bell cow back that they kind of rode, which is probably a little easier if your options are Derrick Henry. But Josh McDaniels has always used kind of an interesting committee approach. And just when you think you have a handle on who's going to be in the backfield for the Patriots, it changes. And I'm curious to see, how that's going to work this year. He has a couple of different options. He has 3 different guys who are capable of or who have been starters in the past. I like some of the depth and some of the potential here, but I guess for me, it was just I liked 8 backfields more than them. I struggled with their position. I had them at different places. I kind of reshuffled mine over the weekend when I was looking at the depth charts again and when I was working on how I felt about them, and ended up dropping the Patriots a little bit so that they're top of the middle. But really my 7, 8, and 9 are kind of a group for me that I was wrestling with where I was going to put them, and I shuffled them around a little bit this weekend and put New England down a little bit.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that that's a group. And
we have the same 3 teams. We just have them kind of shuffled around.
There were a couple spots like that where we're splitting hairs.
It's kind of probably this is where it becomes a little bit a matter of personal preference and team, and it's probably going to take me a while before I feel confident trusting the Patriots backfield rotation with Josh McDaniels. I'll never trust Josh McDaniels. I'll just be honest. But trying to figure out what they want to do and how they're going to deploy. I do feel like this probably is Ramondre's last year in New England, which will be interesting. I think that they're going to tilt toward Travion Henderson going forward. I could be wrong, but
as they should.
Well, and I think that's why they took him there. It's like that with Cleveland. I think we'll see Jerome Ford before in a contract year, and I'm pretty sure they took Quinshon Judkins because they want him to be the future, and Dylan Sampson would be a nice future. They'll have a couple guys that they can pair. I think it's just a matter of in 25, how much do the rookies get established and how much is it about leaving room for growth? A lot more rookies impacting the depth chart in the AFC, I think, than what we saw in the NFC.
I would agree.
That'll do it for us today for this first half of the draw. You will not have to wait that long to find out about our top 8 backfields. We will be back tomorrow because I'm going to be traveling this weekend. We will be back looking at the top 8 backfields tomorrow. But Dennis, they don't have to wait a very long time. But if they still want to fill those lonely hours now that it's summer and there's fewer options on TV, what can they do?
Well, they should hurry up and catch up. Go to their favorite podcast platform, hit that search bar, type in the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast, give us a follow, subscribe, leave us a rating and a review.
Well, that'll do it for us today. We'll be back tomorrow with the top 8 backfields in the AFC. Until then, you guys have a wonderful evening.